A senator in the state of Arizona has recently submitted a bill that seeks to make Bitcoin legal tender in the state of Arizona. Now, this brings up some problems because, number one, that is unconstitutional. According to the Constitution, only gold and silver can be declared legal tender, which brings up the question, how is paper money, fiat currency, considered legal tender today? Ready? Let's dive in. All right, guys, take a look with me here at this recent article from Coindesk.com. State Senator has recently introduced a bill that would make Bitcoin legal tender in Arizona. And so the bill, SB 1341, was introduced by Senator Wendy Rogers. And it would amend the list of accepted legal tender, and it would include Bitcoin in that list. And that would mean that the cryptocurrency would have to be accepted for the payment of debt, public charges, taxes, and other dues. Now, what this is, number one, is different than what some other states have done. There are some other states that are just saying, hey, you can use Bitcoins, for payments for things. Government employees can take their Bitcoin or their salary in Bitcoin, even though it's denominated in dollars. That's a big distinction here. They say when you actually get paid, we'll pay you in that dollar amount worth of Bitcoin. And so this is very different. This is declaring legal tender. And as it says in the subtitle of this article, the U.S. Constitution doesn't allow individual states to create their own legal tender. So is that true? Well, let's first take a look. We're going to look at the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. If we scroll down here, Congress has the power to do lots of things, including, in Clause 5, to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. So there's a lot packed into this. Number one, to coin money. In the Articles of Confederation, which preceded the Constitution, it did not say specifically to coin money. I believe it said create money. I don't know what the exact word was, but it essentially gave it gave them the power to print paper currency. That led to the creation of the Continental, and the hyperinflation that resulted as a result was to pay for the war effort. And because of that, everybody who was drafting the Constitution was saying, hey, we just experienced hyperinflation in the Continental, which was our paper currency. We don't want to go through that again because it wrecked local economies. And so in the Constitution, they said coining money was the only power that the United States government had. They couldn't print paper money. It could only be metal. And regulate the value thereof, fix the standard of weights and measures, because they were specifically saying all that we're doing is defining the weight that is assigned to the name. So the dollar was originally a weight gold, silver. And so that's all it was at first. It was granting the federal government the power to coin the money to set the value of those weights and measures. Further, we got to look down here at Article 1, Section 10. This is prohibitions for states. No state shall do a lot of things, and no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. So first, the federal government only has the power to coin money, and they were given the power of creating the money. And so it was saying, federal government, you've got the power to create money, but it can only be gold and silver. And in Clause 1 of Section 10, just 2 sections later, it says no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in the payment of debts. So the federal government is the one that creates the money, and it can only be gold or silver. And no state is allowed to go around that and say that anything outside of the gold and silver that the federal government has made is money. The only thing that can be money will be the federal government's gold and silver coin. Now, it is important here that it makes the distinction payment of debts. That is very important in terms of legal tender laws. And why? Well, right now, with fiat currency, the money supply expanding rapidly, we have a situation where debtors are rewarded at the expense of the lenders, because in an environment where money is being expanded rapidly, money is easier and easier to get your hands on. That means incomes, and especially business incomes, go up. And if you have debt, especially fixed rate debt, then that becomes easier to pay off because the dollars are more abundant. Therefore, it's easier to get your hands on them. And another way of saying that is that other things get more expensive because there's more money relative to all the stuff. That means the money is less valuable relative to all the stuff, meaning that the money that you're paying back that debt with is worth less than the money you originally borrowed. And so the fact that they specified multiple times payment of debts was specifically to avoid the scenario where debtors could take advantage of inflation of banknotes through fractional reserve banking system or any other type of fiat currency system and take advantage of that to be able to profit off of debt. The fact that gold and silver coin payment, it was the only thing good for payment of debts, meant that the lenders couldn't get screwed over, and they would, even if the currency or the banknotes, what was being backed up by gold, was to hyperinflate or be printed more, or that reserve ratio was not met, then you still could, as a lender, say, hey, give me gold and silver instead. That way I preserve the purchasing power of what I lent to you in the first place. And then that is specifically what was FDR repealed when they took out the gold clause and made it illegal and confiscated all the Americans' gold. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there. Now, in regards to this, since it's very clear what the Constitution says, I got a question from Joshua Williams on Twitter here. How did the dollar become legal tender then, considering what the Constitution says? Now, this is a very interesting story about kind of the evolution here and how that evolved, because there's this concept of lawful money, and lawful money is any form of currency issued by the United States Treasury. Well, who makes the money that we use today? It is not the United States Treasury, it's the Federal Reserve. So how did that come into being? Well, number one, banks used to operate individually in isolation. And so they would issue bank notes. And there were all sorts of different bank notes that were redeemable for gold or silver. Now, those were currency that was backed up by the bank's reserves of gold and silver. In 1913, they created the Federal Reserve, which was just a bank for banks to back up the banking system and to create a uniform banknote that was acceptable across state lines. That was the, kind of the public reasoning for this all. And in doing so, they ran into some legal issues because obviously what the Constitution says about what legal tender can be. And so in 1913 here, the Federal Reserve was given the right to issue Federal Reserve notes, which were backed up by the U.S. government redeemed in lawful money. Now, it didn't specify what lawful money meant, but everybody understood at the time, again, it was gold and silver. What the Constitution said was legal tender. And so the Federal Reserve being established was just a banknote like all of the banks had been operating already. Nobody considered those banknotes to be anything but something to use to redeem your gold and silver at a future point. So all you're doing is centralizing this under the central bank at this point, and you're not creating a new form of money. Gold and silver was the money. This was just a uniform note that was redeemable in money. And so in 1913, the fact that they didn't specify what lawful money meant created some issues. And so because of that, Congress had to amend the Federal Reserve Act in 1933 to include all U.S. coins and currency as legal tender for all purposes. And so that was the kind of the turning point where Federal Reserve notes were in the Federal Reserve Act of 1933. Congress said, okay, yes, that counts as money again because it's backed up by money, gold and silver from the government. Now, obviously, following that, we had the ending of the gold standard when FDR confiscated the gold, made it illegal to own gold, made dollars were no longer redeemable for gold for American citizens. Just institutions and other countries could redeem their dollars for gold. And that set the precedence for 30 years later, after the United States had printed so many extra dollars, bought so many things from overseas with them, that there wasn't enough gold to back up all the dollars in circulation around the world. All the world caught on. They were trying to reserve their or redeem their dollars for gold, just like the U.S. had promised. And the United States just decided to repeat what it did 30 years earlier, And instead of just for its US citizens, it just told the entire world, no, you're not going to get your gold. Those dollars are not redeemable for gold anymore. And the system stuck. These things have a lot of history, a lot of momentum behind them. And that's why the dollar is still used as currency, as the global reserve currency around the world today, because these systems have a lot of momentum behind them. And while you can go back to the beginning and you can see the federal government only has the power to coin money, not to print money. And states can't make anything but gold and silver coin, legal tender. Well, we have today paper that is legal tender. There are little ways that have changed, little things throughout history that have moved and guided that river of history to get you to the point where your entire system is built on something that was originally never supposed to happen. Little things to skirt the letter of the law, with having the Federal Reserve print those banknotes originally and then later adopting them as legal tender through the Federal Reserve Act, even though the Constitution says otherwise. And so that's the story, and that's how you get a system that is completely contrary to the original intention. Little changes over time that set precedents for later changes that eventually get the system to an entirely different place. Lots of momentum behind these things. And so that's why it's really hard to predict things into the future, because you don't really know how the little changes that you're making are going to influence those the future destinations. So that's the story of how we have paper money today, even though the Constitution says no. And that is why this bill that has been submitted in Arizona to make Bitcoin legal tender is probably dead on arrival, because while we already violate the Constitution with paper money, there's no way that they'll let us continue that even further with something like Bitcoin, which poses a threat to the dollar dominance around the world. If you're interested in buying Bitcoin, which is currently under $40,000, still is at $38,000 roughly, I've got all of the resources, services, companies that I use for Bitcoin buying and storage, and I've got affiliate links for those in the description below. Finally, I will be speaking at an event in Dallas on March 5th. I would love to see you there. If you can make it, the sign up link is in the description below. As always, really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.